Okay, cheesh, everybody. How doyaksen newsum. So I asked you folks, I give you a couple minutes to prepare, and I'll give you 3 minutes or less to answer this question. Let's see, I think I have a timer. So I'll start a timer just so that we'll have it and we could try and maybe you'll be asked to testify someday. And sometimes, unless it's invited testimony, they'll usually give you 3 minutes. It's pretty common. And then they'll cut you off after 3 minutes. And so the idea here, hold on one second. So the idea here is in 3 minutes or less, you're going to answer this question. And the question is, why should we revitalize our languages? So I think a lot of us, we have a lot of answers in our mind, but sometimes we need to convey those answers to somebody else. And there's all kinds of reasons this might happen. Someone might have an opportunity to fund a program. Your tribe or other Indigenous organization might be considering developing a language school or program. And you might have someone who wants to just know why. So in this scenario, you're going to answer. Everyone's going to answer. Just and it doesn't have to take the whole 3 minutes. If you take less, then that's fine. Blessed are the brief. But don't reply to someone else and don't say, oh, they already said it. Like, I want to hear what your thoughts are. So you're going to have to pretend that you're in a vacuum and no one else has answered this question yet. It's really an exercise just to start our conversation here. So who would like to go first?
Tidasa the Jews Henu Hadkirtikian Atlant Asian Gin Haganan U Kilgan Hadas Kilquias Ik Gudak Eich Hinangagan Kalan Skatgek U Kilgungan Ik Kunisi Quias Eich Gin Haganan U Hadas Kil Eich Kutket Hadas Kil Yilu Dagan Waya Klingon Hadkish Kusugan Klistluan Tlawadluan Skatasan Klistluan Tlawadluan Kusugan Hadkil Skatadasan Sandlan Wadluan U Hadkil Skatan Genhaganan U Hadkil Ashji Haganan U Each Hatagan. I will translate to English. I said, greetings, my Haida name is Duck Juice, I'm here. I said, the reason is because of our precious Haida language needs to live on. I said it's important to learn your language. Also at the beginning I said Ginhaganan U Kilgun. The reason is because it's important. And then I said because of our precious ancestors, because the Haida language is sacred and important. I'm gonna try to shorten this. Also said Hadkil Ashji Haganan U Ik Hatagan, the Haida language, that which makes us Haida. How
Oh, you have 20 seconds left. Fabulous. Okay, who would like to go next? You start talking, I'll start the counter. I'll get one that we can put on the screen next time.
Does it have to be 3 minutes long?
Nope. Minutes or less.
I look forward to the day when I can give myself a longer introduction. I do. I'll celebrate the day. I recently was in a class where I was asked if I went to heaven and saw my ancestors and they only spoke to me in Tlingit, what would I say? And I hung my head down and it really hit me. So I'd have to say one of the main reasons for me to understanding or learning the Tlingit language is that it is the language of our ancestors. I want to speak with them. And so, in addition to that, though, we all have different levels of understanding and the different connections to our land. And so, knowing all the different levels gives us not only the rights to the land, but it gives us that respect that we can give to the land. It gives us a record of generational history, and I wrote understand all the different levels of spirituality within our culture, and helps others to understand us completely. And finally, it gives us a unity of purpose. All of us here today, or all together, we have the same purpose. The end. Minute and a half?
Hooray! You did that in a minute. Well, you had a minute and 45 seconds. So I guess you did it in a minute and 50.
Before the elevator door closes,
Let's really absorb these thoughts. Fabulous.
Yeah.
Sheesh.
I'm happy to go.
Thank you. Doixon.
Hook Yunks Duayu. David Roger Lang, Duam, Gumshoam. My name is David Lang, Hook Yunks in Simshian. Why should we revitalize our languages or revitalize native languages? The soul of the people is in how we express ourselves to one another within the comfort of our own environment. The entire cultural concepts like sense of balance, community, and things like that cannot be expressed or are expressed in sentence structure and word choice. And those kind of subtleties are often lost in translation, and noun first, Eurocentric, self-centric English doesn't properly express the native viewpoint or our cultural priorities. Thank you.
Oh, excellent. These are getting faster. You have 2 minutes and 3 seconds left. It's very succinct. Great points. Okay.
I'd like an awkward pause for the rest of mine. I'd like 2 minutes of awkward eye contact. So I'm just.
You have to end with, and I'd just like to say.
That's so wonderful. Okay.
I have to jump off for a meeting, so is it okay? I'm totally split because right now, if you're saying, am I talking to the school board? Then I'm saying something totally different from how I would say my own feelings about why. It's the same thing with music. Like if I'm there to talk about why I think music is important, they would not want to hear that. They'd want me to talk about their goals. So I guess if I'm talking to persuade a stakeholder, I would say for the school board, as we all know, the language contains within it a wisdom, a knowledge. It's a way that we see the world. And if we don't take care of this now, we will lose a depth of knowledge that our children and our world deserve to know. As an educator, we also know that language is steep in values that are the way we see the world. And if we are not teaching to the way in which that map is viewed by many of the children that we serve, how do we ever expect for them to feel like they are learning in a safe place where their identity is valued for them to be successful? Please support language revitalization. So there was a little bit of me and a little bit of like getting to academic achievement.
Wonderful. So yeah, this is great. Yeah, this is really just it's a practice ground, right? Because you might have that opportunity, and testifying is challenging, and then sometimes answering the questions afterwards is even more challenging. Just don't laugh at people if they ask you a ridiculous question, which I'll share some later. But oh,
Anastasia, I'm so sorry that I can only pop in for like 20 minutes before class, but
okay. Geesh, who would like to go next?
Could I go next?
Ah,
Uh, I think language is revitalization is the first step in reclaiming our land and our way of life, and claiming a sovereign nation. And uh, when you're learning the language, you're learning about the way of thought of our ancestors and their different values and everything that just like how you say you don't ask someone, do you speak Tlingit, do you hear it? And so just in the little ways like that, they're really so powerful. And I believe when our children know our languages and our values, and with everything that's going on in this world, we can really come together and make a change and reclaim our land. It wasn't that long ago that colonialism came over and started to take things and erase us, and we've got it grasped. So I think language is the first step in making the changes that we hope to see and that our children can experience, like our ancestors did once again.
Sheesh. Okay. I did that in 1 minute and 10 seconds. That was great. That's great. Okay, who would like to go next? Let's keep it going.
I could do mine.
Okay.
So I said, with every language that we lose the knowledge, perspective, beliefs, purpose, and understanding of not only who we are as individuals, but also who we are collectively as humans. However,
Yes, you're going to get the trophy for the fastest testimony. It was 15 seconds. Wonderful. Fabulous. Okay, who'd like to go next?
I can go next. I'm walking home with my son, so if I'm breathing hard, because I'm walking.
Okay.
I think the reason why we should revitalize our languages, when my grandmother was 5 years old, she was removed from her home and put into boarding school, and she wasn't allowed to speak Hutkil or Shamalia. So our languages have a connection with our past and our elders and our lands. And as a speaker of Shamalia and Hutkil, it's my goal that my children grow up with their indigenous languages, that my son is able to speak his language in school. And it's my goal that my granddaughter speaks both Hutkil and Shamalia growing up. We're in a precious state of time where we're on the verge of losing our languages because our elders are passing away. So the time that we have now is very precious, where we need to show a lynch, we need to learn and teach our language. Legal and direction.
Direction. It's wonderful. And on the move, moving kids around. So yes, we can multitask. Wonderfully demonstrated. Okay, who'd like to go next?
I can go.
Okay. You're mute.
Thank you. Yeah. I noticed that in the Atlas of a Mind, it really did a good job at conveying the things that are highlighted in English in comparison to, in this instance, the Tofa language. But when we're exploring concepts in English, it can be really hard to convey them, especially if it's a sensitive topic and we're speaking with elders and we're trying to, learn information from them, let alone have them speak about it in English. Like, for example, the most in-depth Kushtaka story I've ever heard was 100% Tlingit. And I think that it can be a lot easier to understand and appreciate these things that if you say them in English, they're kind of, spooky. They're like sensitive. We don't talk about it, taboo, whatever. But if you talk about it in Tlingit, it highlights a much more sacred undertone. It doesn't just focus on the, spooky stuff. But sheesh.
Okay, sheesh. Fabulous. A minute and 35 seconds left. You guys are so... somebody taught you all well how to be succinct. Good job. Who's next?
I can go.
Okay.
We need to revitalize our traditional languages because our languages are the foundation for our culture. It's our identity, our songs, our dances. It's who we are and who we live with. It's our connection to those who've walked on and to the land that we walk on today. We need them.
Okay. Drop the microphone. Okay, 15 seconds. Wonderful. Thank you.
I could go.
Okay.
Why should we revitalize our languages? We should revitalize our languages because languages are more than just a series of words. Languages are connections to our cultural identities, our values, our environment, and our spirit. If we are able to strengthen our languages, we are in turn strengthening our bonds to our history, worldviews, and ancestral ways of thinking and being. Our languages are a living record of our history, but aren't history. They are still living. It isn't just who we were, it is who we are, and it is who we will continue to be. Look, I like asparagus. It's my favorite vegetable. But there are many vegetables that I don't like and many more that I've never had, but that doesn't mean that we should get rid of all vegetables except for asparagus.
Okay.
Wow.
The asparagus. Okay.
Not a bad veggie. It's pretty good. So I reframed it just slightly because the language doesn't belong to me. I should contribute to language revitalization because colonial ways aren't working for me either. We should revitalize Indigenous languages because our children deserve to live in a world where languages don't have to be revitalized because they've become the standard where a gathering space of ancestral perspective regularly exists.
Sheesh. And thank you for doing the adjustment.
Wow. Da hatala es dalang es hangalgang atlans es di ganangai lagang gudahigans di nanuijan ginawan di chinuijan sisiegat is gankokolds di alang uijung nangskatas hinu hadkil di kiang Joseph Hilaire Jr. hinu yatsatai kil di kiang hikta antlai scantla gustu di ijung Gayalas gustu di kwalagang Tiltugong Antlai Esnagang Ditalung Kaskatin Scan Tukshake Atlans Ejung. Hi, good people. I'm honored to be here and to be in all of your presence. My belated grandmother was Viola Burgess. My belated grandfather was Delbert Kelly. My parents are Trina and Joseph Hilaire Sr. My Haida name is Nangskatas. I'm just gonna fast forward. I live in Juneau and I'm here with my friends Kaskatine and Tukshake. Where am I at right now? But how much time do I have? Because I felt like that was a long time. I'm sorry.
You have a minute 40 seconds left.
We should revitalize our language because they need to be reawakened, and the language needs to be reawakened in domains where they're heavily sleeping, like going out on the canoe, cooking, the constellations, traveling, the household, ceremony, and more. More of us should know basic knowledge regarding our language, like introducing ourselves, greetings, counting, and more. We deserve to keep our languages alive because it was wrongfully taken away. It allows us to engage in a special relationship with the natural and supernatural world in our culture. And if we don't use it, we lose it. Hutlan. How
you nailed it. 45 seconds left. Yeah, it was great job. Okay, who's left? Who hasn't gone yet? Let's hear them all.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Dan Nizun, Anna Cox Uza, the Hundanaka Heshday Nila Rasisni, Gashdow Huts Ansedans, Madik Tohadana. Good day, my name is Anna Clock. My Danaka name is Nila Torah. We're from Kaltag, Caribou Clan. And we have to revitalize our languages for the survival and well-being of our lands, waters, and all the people who inhabit them. Indigenous people are the only ones proven to responsibly steward the lands, waters, and all our resources. And the knowledge of how to do that is ingrained in the thought world in the way our ancestors spoke. Good at. That's it.
Sheesh. Okay. Did it in 45 seconds. It was great. Who's next? Did everybody go? Let me see. One.
Oh, okay. Hi, I haven't gone yet. Sorry if my dog keeps getting in here. He's being really difficult right now. So a part of why we should revitalize languages, there's plenty of different reasons. Some including like being able to just teach, like not even just children and youth, but like older people who like don't know like a lot. Like personally where I'm from, like we don't have any fluent language speakers anymore. So it'll just be a good way to bring back the different values, traditions, different songs and dances. Sorry. Yeah, I think that getting the whole community involved will just bring us like closer and can actually reduce a lot of the amount of substance abuse and alcoholism that plague our communities. It like establishes and enhances identity by giving community members a better understanding of who they are and where their people came from. And sorry, I don't know what his problem is. Yeah, and like not only establishing identity, but it also gives a lot of young Native people the opportunity to just learn their languages. It offers a really strong antidote, I guess, to the culture clash that like a lot of people experience. But you know, like I can't really verbalize it, but just kind of gives them the tools to be able to walk in the two worlds that we're going in, the Western side, and like just being able to maintain both identities and to have to reduce the amount of clashing it does. And if they wanted more of a scientific answer, I'd talk about all the cognitive benefits that go into like learning more than one language. Again, sorry about my dog.
No, it was great performance under difficult circumstances. You had a counter argument right there where the dog says, no, you just have to pet dogs all day. That's what you do.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Great job. Great work. Okay, who's next?
Ja, I think that there are many reasons why language should be revitalized, but I once had a language revitalization teacher who said that when we perform ceremonies, our ancestors can't understand us because they never spoke English. And so I think that by revitalizing language, it would be a great way to give thanks to our ancestors because they could understand what we're saying and whatnot. How
Wonderful point.
Hi, Kaskatine here. And so I wanted to say that since we believe everything is alive, and while people live on this land, that the language deserves to be alive too. It's a part of who we are, and it keeps us connected to our ancestors. And it wasn't our choice to stop speaking it in the first place since our grandparents were forced. I think revitalization is a good step in our healing to what we lost or almost lost. Finish,
Sheesh, there's just a few left by my count. I don't count very well, but
Way prompt. I'll just what you could tell me, I guess.
why should we revitalize our languages? And so say it in 3 minutes or less. Pretend that I don't know why, and also pretend that no one else has said anything yet.
Okay. That's hard. Okay. One of the things that I think about as to why language revitalization is important is because we live right now at the intersection of many different crises, right? Like white supremacy, the climate crisis, and all of these crises require us to, dramatically shift our thinking on how we relate to the earth and to each other. And one of the gifts that we have to offer the world as Indigenous people is knowing how to live in communities that are loving and take care of each other and take strength from that. That's all I got right now.
Fabulous. Okay, was that everybody?
Dixie, I could.
Okay.
I would like to help revitalize my language because, like the article in the Atlas Mind, our language is tied to the forest and the land and in hunting, and our languages are rooted in land preservation and the sacredness of our salmon and the waters, and it's also rooted in our histories and traditions. So, and I felt in the past, I felt the desire to learn the language as interest, but it's only been until recently that I really felt the loss of fluent speakers, and it's really kind of shooken and scared me to think that our languages won't be spoken by either me or my children, and that I want to, or that it won't be a living language. So I want to be a part of their learning experience and their connection and learning the language so that it's there for them, so that they can pick up that deeply rooted knowledge that's in our language.
Geesh, yeah, wow.
Ach, zinach sai, chukanedich katsati, hunakau dach. My name is Kach Zin. I'm a Chukanedi from Hunakau. And my people, the Tlingit people, are one of an endless number in the world who are facing ongoing genocide and cultural loss of all of our culture. My people have been on this land so long that we've seen it change. We've seen island form. We've seen islands disappear. We've seen the landscape change. Most people spend most of their lives working towards revitalizing this language, and most of us will spend the rest of our lives working towards language revitalization. And we may not see that change with the lack of support, the lack of funding, the lack of resources that is a hurdle for any of us to make more material or give each other the tools to use our language and live our language rather than just learning our language. I think that's all I got. That's all I could think of. It was
Jeez. Jeez. Fabulous. Maybe one left, maybe two.
Me. Tuksha here. A friend helped me come to the realization that language holds the people's worldview. Colonialism has tried to erase this worldview and replace those with capitalism and social disparities.
Language revitalization does not only accomplish creating more speakers, it is an essential element of a holistic approach to solving some of the most pressing issues in Indigenous communities, like mental health, climate change, socioeconomic issues, etc. Sharing the wealth of cultural knowledge helps create a sense of community, supplements individuals' sense of identity and purpose. How
Wonderful. Is there one left? I think I might have everybody counted.
خد Yakdishiach Sai. Why should we revitalize our languages? Because languages carries the history of people. My language carries my history of my ancestors. It's an empowering part of cultural identity, land, and ancestors. We should be revitalizing these languages. We need to move beyond language awareness. We know they're endangered languages. We can appreciate that these languages carry a unique beauty, but we need to do a little bit more. We need to speak these languages with each other. We need to keep them alive. Indigenous.
Yay! Goodness cheese. What a fantastic collection of testimony. Just in terms of if you were, so like it's a pressure sort of exercise, right? But it's also, I just want to hear your thoughts on it. It's a wonderful way to start our class. If you were ever going to testify, like say to the Alaska State Legislature on a particular bill, usually, find out how much time you're going to get. That usually give people 3 minutes. And then you want to say who you are and who you represent. So usually you'll just say, I represent myself. Unless you're representing some organization, then they kind of want to know that. So that's usually where you start, like who you are, and I represent myself. And then if you start speaking your Indigenous language, which I think is a great thing to do, but if you start from there, they might interrupt you and say, we need to know for the record, just because they don't know if you're going to say that. So one thing you could do is say, this is who I am, I represent myself, then move immediately into your Indigenous language and make your testimony there. And you can also offer to, they might contact you and have you translate so that you can have, there can be a subtitle on the recording of what you are testifying. The other thing is to make sure that you're thinking of what the delivery method is, what your message is, and making sure, like I like to read poetry, and meaning I like to write my poetry and then read it in front of people. And I was once asked to read poetry on the radio, and I was 20 years old, and I was very excited and nervous, and my poetry teacher was talking to me about it, and her husband was there, and he was also a poet, and he gave me like some really good advice, and he said, don't swallow your last 2 lines. So when you're getting to your final thoughts, like don't kind of fade out as you're talking, but like just go boom all the way through the thing. So it's a bit of a performance, but sometimes these things are going to happen. So I was looking it up, in 2013, I was invited to be the keynote speaker at the Tribal Assembly for Tlingit and Haida, and I talked about languages. And at the end, I said, well, here's the 3 things that I think we need to do in the state of Alaska. I said, 1 is make Alaska Native languages the co-official languages of Alaska, so we're not an English-only state. 2, build and support language nests and language medium schools and immersion programs. And 3, make it a requirement that everybody who graduates high school or college in Alaska has to take 1 semester of an Alaska Native language. I said that would probably put us on the path. And I have well, I guess those are still my top, well, those next 2 are my top 2. And a politician came up to me, who I don't particularly care for, and but he was nice and respectful, shook my hand, and he said, great job. I don't think I agree, but you did a good job presenting it. Then he walked off. I was like, okay, forget you. And then another one was there, and he said, let's meet and let's figure out what we can do. And that was Jonathan Christ Tompkins. So then we met at Pelmini's, and we had some Paminis, and we just talked about the languages as official as probably the thing that we could do. And so I was asked to give the first, if it's invited testimony, then you don't necessarily have a time limit, but you should be shooting for 5 minutes, I think. Because after that, people kind of stop listening if it's sort of in a meeting. So I was on my way, and I was, I tend to run late for things, but I was doing pretty good. And then I got a call as I was driving downtown, and it was the beloved elder Kasech Selena Everson. She said, "I would like to testify, but I need a ride." I said, "I'll come get you." So then I had to go to Douglas and go pick her up, which I was happy to, but just in terms of timing, I was getting a little nervous because I was supposed to go right when the thing starts at 9 a.m. And dropped her off, and it was weather kind of like right now in Juneau, where it had just sort of been warm, but then it snowed, and then it maybe melted, and then it snowed, then it froze, and it snowed again. So just really icy conditions. So I drove up to the back of the Capitol so that she could just walk in and not have to go up any stairs. And then I went to go turn and go down the very steep hill, and I began to slide down the street. And it was going very slow, but I was also just looking ahead thinking, I don't know if I can actually stop if I need to. And I managed to drift over towards the curb, and then luckily I didn't jump the curb. The curb just sort of stopped this pickup truck. And I look ahead, and there's a car illegally parked there on the corner. And I'm thinking, I don't know if I can get around that car before I start sliding. And I also don't know if I start going, if I'm going to be able to stop. And then there's a daycare right across the street. And so there's these people walking their children over across the street. And I was like, and I also don't want to kill any children today. So it was very high pressure, but I had to go. I was on in minutes. And so I managed to find a time, get around that car, get down the hill, get under control, go park, walk in, mouth dry, absolutely just cold sweat. And I walked in, I sat down, and I just gave testimony. So it was really fun. And I also want to share with you folks you have to be ready for some of the silliest things that you might hear because people think all kinds of ways. So some of the things that I heard during my experience as testimony was, well, my ancestors are Norwegian, and when they moved here to America, they stopped speaking Norwegian. So why should we do this, right? And so that was the point. That was the point. And then somebody else said, "Oh yeah, well my ancestors were Russian, and then they stopped speaking Russian when they came here." And so I had to explain, we know, but sometimes you're going to have to explain some of these things. So I had to say, well, if I said, one, you're talking about languages migrating, from their place to another place. So maybe if you're going to immigrate somewhere, you might learn the language and stop speaking another language. But I don't think you should, but you might. I said, so Indigenous peoples, we are here. There's nowhere else for us to go, and we haven't gone anywhere, but certain things happen to our languages that put them into serious trouble. And two, you can go back to Norway and you can learn Norwegian, or your descendants can if they would like to. You can go to Russia and you can learn Russian. But if these languages go, they are gone forever. There's a chance you can bring them back, but it's very, very difficult. So some of the other silly things, well, I guess I shouldn't call them silly, I'm judging people. Some of the other challenging things that I heard was, how do you balance the ancient of the Alaska Native language with the modern of the English? And so I said, well, there's a little bit of stereotype in your question there, that, thinking that Alaska Native is ancient and English is modern, because all languages are modern. They're just here. And I don't really like these labels, but there's a bit of truth in terms of this. English was never forbidden from people to speak and to use, especially in fields of education. So English got to share knowledge with the entire world and absorb it and provide it. And Indigenous languages have been restricted from that. And so we have to do a lot of work to bring some concepts like all kinds of things from the sciences into our languages. But to try and sort of say that they're ancient and primitive is incorrect. And so if you ever drive past Lemon Creek, and you'll see where all the eagles are. That's a place called Eich Gutchin. And the first word, Eich, means a slough, and the second word, Gut, means an upcurrent of warm water in a river. And then Hin is river or water. And so the reason that's important is because wherever there's one of these warm currents, that's where the eagles will be in the wintertime, because that's where the fish are going to go and the eagles eat the fish. And so this is why there's so many fish on the Chilkat River. So this is echoing a lot of the points that you folks brought up. But I want to make sure that you never know when you're going to have to answer some of these questions. And you've got them in your mind, but sometimes what we're going to do is practice bringing those things to the surface, and sometimes in a way that needs to hit a certain sort of timeliness. And also, as some folks pointed out, like sometimes you got to know your audience. Like it's a fictional scenario, but you would give a different answer if this was one of your friends or relatives asking, or this was, and it could be, you could have a lifelong friend who asks you some question that's kind of offensive. Like, why would you want to do that? People just let them go because they're not useful. Like that could be a friend of yours that says that. And you got to be sort of prepared for those things and answer them in a way that you're not trying to burn people to ashes necessarily. Any other thoughts on that topic? And we're going to move into some definitions and then into our readings. Yeah, so there's a hot spring, and that's usually Yutayihin, but then Gut is it's kind of as a geothermal current that keeps a river not hot, but just warmer than other rivers. And so it was interesting because I didn't know what that part of the name meant, but Marie Olson is the one who told me. So I want to make sure we're going to take a look at these terms. I want to make sure that we understand what these terms are, how they're generally used. Next week, we'll probably look at a different set of terms. Just as we talk about this field of language revitalization, it's important that we're understanding how the terms work so that we're knowing how to use them. So I guess, let's see, I'll put them on the screen so you can see them. So the first one is language shift. Can somebody tell me what is language shift?
That is known by other terms like language transfer, language replacement, or language assimilation, process of shifting, speaking one language to a different language, and it's usually over an extended period of time.
Yes, yeah, so it's moving from one language usually to another, right? So usually you have in this case, an indigenous language, and then you have a colonial language that comes, then there's bilingualism, then you move towards monolingualism in the colonial language. So when we say language shift, that's specifically what we're talking about in this class, is moving from one language to another, usually completely abandoning the first language. So what then is reversing language shift?
Reverse language shift is, I would say, like the opposite of a language shift. Like maybe for our case here in Southeast Alaska would be like removing English and replacing it with Tlingit, Hatkil, or Shmal. Sorry, I feel like I butcher it every time I say Shmaling. I don't know. But yeah, just going back to the native languages of this area, or in like the same concept elsewhere in the world.
Yeah, so in a pre-contact world, you probably have Multilingualism for a lot of people, some people monolingual, like I'm sure there were people who only spoke Tlingit or who only spoke Khatgil or who only spoke Smalgich. And so, but then you move to bilingualism or multilingualism. But usually we're looking at, when we're talking about reversing language shift, we're often talking about a colonial language coming in and usually forcing a situation where the whole population goes over to the colonial language. And so usually reversing language shift means let's get back to bilingualism. Let's move to that point. Because I don't know if you're going to be able to just move away from the colonial language altogether unless you sort of declared your independence or you started some sort of community. And it's certainly possible. You could start a community that was entirely in your language. I don't think that's an impossible thing to do. But I do think multilingualism at least is going to have to be the thing. And so reversing language shift means we're stopping that total language loss and we're moving towards usually some form of multilingualism. So under the sort of operations of language revitalization, you kind of got three major sort of area, like I guess we'll call them, like what are you trying to do? Are you trying to stabilize, revitalize, or revive? And what would the difference between those three be?
I'll give my input. I would say stabilization is almost similar to maintenance. You're trying to just maintain where you're at, keep it stable, not lose, but not gain. Revitalization, I would say you're trying to bring it back. It's already kind of started, but you're still, I guess, would keep going with it. Revival to me is maybe it's sleeping and you have to kind of shock it with a defibrillator, revive it, get it started.
Yep, that's correct. So yeah, so if I would say probably for each of our populations, 1% or less can speak the language. Like of the Tlingit people, less than 1% can speak Tlingit. Of the Haida people, I would believe less than 1% could speak Haida. And I'm not sure about Smalgich, but I'm sure it's somewhere in that neighborhood. So then sometimes it's a numbers game, right? We would like half of our population to speak our language. So then your target is maybe 10,000 speakers, right? And so it's a lofty, long-term goal. But if you said, oh yeah, well we're Greenlandic and 98% of our population can speak, so we're stabilization is what we're doing. We're trying to make sure we don't go through language shift. Revitalization means we still have speakers left and we would like to be gaining more than we lose so we can move towards stabilization. Then revival would be we have no speakers left. We have to reconstruct the language and bring it back. Any other thoughts on those terms?
I was going to make a joke and say we have 10%, but it should be it. I was just kidding. Probably have.
Oh, we lost you there. So if you come back, keep on talking. But in the meantime, so in terms of how you measure this stuff, like how safe is your language, how, what's the state of your language? Sometimes you're looking at a numbers thing. How many speakers do you have? And measuring speakers is not easy business. We're going to talk about that in the near future. Assessments and fluency as opposed to fluent and not fluent. But then also, like, are you increasing or are you decreasing? Then some of the other big things is, are there children who speak the language? And this is also kind of tricky territory because, it's not like, are there children who could understand some things? But, there was a scholar who came up to our region and was talking to us about the health of the language. And and said, well, do you got a child that could tell me a story in your language? And that's what I want. I want children who could tell stories. I want children who talk about their day in the language. So there's some other terms we're going to look at in this thing, but those are some of the biggest things. And also, what is the general age of the language, and then also like where is it being used. And so we'll look at some different things that are used to sort of measure those. And the reason we look at those things is to set some targets for ourselves. So what about language planning? What is language planning?
My idea of language planning could be like building a curriculum for a native language, or like planning a language immersion. That's pretty limited, but that's what my idea is.
Great. Anyone else have a thought?
Maybe planning like the goals. Like I want to be able to tell the first part of this story in my native language and then be able to translate it afterwards. Or I would like to be able to say hello and goodbye, or just something like plan yourself goals for your language and where you want to be.
Yeah. So it's like where do you want to be? What are you gonna do? How are you gonna do it? So there's several different components of it that we'll look at all this stuff in more detail. But yes, and so the planning process is also just sort of how do we know that we're all kind of trying to do the same thing? How are we avoiding duplication? How are we taking care of conflicts? If you say, hey, we need to go do this, I'm like, no, we need to go do this. Like, how do we resolve those things? How do we come to consensus? How do we decide orthographies, new words? Like all this stuff is usually part of the planning. But the planning then goes down into these other categories, which again, we'll talk about throughout the semester. What about language policy?
I think language policy could be like what policies do the schools and local and state government have regarding languages. Like you, Kune, you fought for Alaskan languages to be recognized at the state level. And so language policy, like in the Ola video, it can be a tricky thing where, maybe the Danish want their in Greenland. This is hypothetical, not from the actual video, but I'm just thinking, like if the policy is you have to learn Danish before you could learn your indigenous language. That would really affect all the native kids. I think in the video it was actually in some settings they could do both. They could learn the government language, but they could also learn their indigenous language. So it depends on which policies are in place and implemented by schools and local, state, federal governments.
Great. Hoa. And so throughout this semester, we're going to sort of just continue to pull some of these things apart. But one of the things, like policy is like, this is what people decide to do. And the way that people do that is usually sometimes through consensus, sometimes through habit, and sometimes through creating some sort of rules or laws, right? And these are going to be different at different levels. So there's the micro is like the individuals and families. So there could be language policies there, and some of those policies could be complicated, right? When Uncle so and so comes around, don't speak Tlingit because he'll get angry. That could be a policy, and some of these things are kind of formal, and some of them are informal. They could also be, oh, after dinner, we're all going to tell stories in Hatkil. That's what we do in our house. So that, like, the house could have its own policies, and it kind of needs to, or else the language won't live in the house, right? And so sometimes you have to mandate some things until they become naturalized. And then there's the meso level, which is, so the micro is the tiny cup of coffee, and then the meso is the medium cup of coffee. And this is communities and organizations. So what is the school's policy? Is it do they do half the day in the indigenous language? Because if they don't, maybe that's a target. And so there's boards and commissions and other folks who set these things, and you have to understand how they work. Because we're going to need more language advocates who are out there on school boards, on city councils, on the tribal councils, in the ANCSA corporations. We're going to need people out there advocating for some of the substantial changes. If we develop a certification process for speaking a language, could organizations then develop a process to say, if you speak an indigenous language to this place, Tlingit, Haida, or Tsimshian, you make more money. We got a different pay scale for those folks. And it doesn't have to be much, but that's a statement. That's a value statement right there. And then there's the macro level. So what are the state and federal policy? And so language policy is sort of like sometimes going through and figuring out what laws exist, what laws need to exist. And those laws don't have to be sort of like a bill that gets signed by a governor, but it could be sort of like, well, in this house, this is how we do things, right? When we go to this immersion camp, we have these rules for if you don't speak the language. So it's a complicated thing, but it's good to just sort of understand how it works so that this all goes into your short, medium, and long range planning. And what about language ideology?
Me, that makes me think of like how oftentimes when a native language speaker tries to translate what they're saying into English, like sometimes it doesn't necessarily match like with the grammar and how for words or phrases are placed in a sentence. And like how in some native languages, like some people, some groups don't have a word for goodbye. It's see you later or I'll see you again, and other things like that. That's what I think of when I see language ideology.
Okay, great. Anyone else have a thought? So within ideology, again, you've got several different fields under this kind of title, right? So part of it could be, how do people feel about the language? And so there's some harsh realities sometimes. Like sometimes I think there's not enough people who really care. There's not enough people who are really just willing to do the work. But then sometimes when I think about it, I'm like, okay, it's got to be more complicated than that. But sometimes ideology is attitudes towards the language. So how can we get folks to value the language more, right? If there's however many thousand Tlingit people or Haida people or Tsimshian peoples, then how do you get more of them to go? And then sometimes ideologies is beliefs about what should happen. So some people say we don't need to teach it at the college, we need to just have it at the home. And then some people say, well, we need to teach at the college, and then this, and then we need to totally restructure education so that it goes through the school. We just build our own schools, and you're going to have conflicting ideologies as well. And some of this is going to come down to how should we write it, how should we speak it. I was talking with one colleague, and she's shared with me, she said, we don't teach anybody who's not ethnically tied to our language, we don't teach any of them our language. And we also don't record it, and we don't write it down. And those are ideologies. Those are the way the language goes. And then sometimes between ideology and policy, you know, Haida used to be written with a little number 7. There was a 7 in there. And now the 7's gone. And that's a combination of ideology and policy. Some people said, no, that's confusing. We need to replace that with this. And so then they implemented a policy. So we're going to talk about how all these things tie together all semester long. And that's what these first 3 readings kind of get us into this kind of mode of thinking. Right? So we've got Atlas of the Mind. We've got Status of Native American Language Endangerment, which was written in 1996. And then we have Planning for the Survival of Linguistic Diversity, which summarizes an awful lot of information and gives you a whole list of things to read. And for those of you who are in the Scholars Program, there's a group of us who are helping to we're faculty and also administrators, and we're going to put together a library of books that we think you folks should have, and we're probably going to get them for you. And then we're going to share that list with other folks who want to see it and just say, here's the books that we think you should have. And then there's going to be some back and forth when it comes to ideology. Like, where's the point for you where it crosses into this thing where you get into disagreement? So you might think, well, this process is really colonial. I want to decolonize everything. And I'm down for that. But you also have to look at like what's been effective in other areas. And I think some of the things that have been effective is to go in and to get into the Death Star and reprogram some of the things and people. And so these are some conversations that we're going to have all semester long. But anything stand out for you folks with any of these 3 readings that you want to talk about? We have about 20 minutes left, so I want to make sure that we're getting into some of your thoughts and questions as well.
I thought it was pretty cool in Atlas in the Mind when the author described the way Tofa and Tuvan and Lilovian, how do you say Lilovian, describe directional movement. And I was comparing that in my mind to what I'm learning about Tlingit, like in terms of time. So in one of the languages, the past is described as being out in front of you, and the future is behind you, behind your backs, where you can't see. And I'm really curious about that because we're learning words like shuka and Tlingit for in front of us, but that also means our ancestors are the ones who came before us. So it was really cool to read that sort of element about other languages as well.
Yes, this leads me to a question, folks. What is a way that your language marks time or distance in ways that differ from English? Or the language you're studying. I'm not trying to say you own the language, right? But
I think in Shemalia, like if we're talking about future, we'll say dim, and then in the past for na. But when we talk about our Adao, our stories, we say white shugi gol, and that's before they could measure time. So I think that part is precious where they didn't really put a time marker on that. It was before our colonial thinking.
Also, expanding on that a little, the dim isn't just to mark time coming up, but it's also like a commitment. Like this will happen. Like we're gonna do that. In addition to just marking that it's upcoming as well. So yeah, there's a lot like that in Somalia.
awesome. Other thoughts? Anyone want to add to that?
You can go ahead, Doug.
I'll just say real quickly, In Hadkil, we have Awash for long ago, and we have um, Awash Hagui for a very long time ago. And then Woody Morrison has um, the really old concepts like going back to the ice age, ice ages, because there was a few of them, and farther back than that, but I don't remember what those terms are off the top of my head.
One more idea I had too, sorry to add in, about distance and time is a lot of times there's not really a direct or a exact measurement ever. It's pretty generalized. So like a lot of times we'll say awas agui u, which means a long time ago. So it doesn't say like specifically what year or, you know, any specific time frame. It'll just say a long time ago. Or they'll say wayat, means nowadays. Or then there's also another word that we use that's called jinga, which means it could either be a distance, a long distance away from where we're at, or it could also mean a long time. So there's one word or verb that we use for both distance and time.
Wow. Yeah, similar in Tlingit, time and space use the same markers, you know, ego to and from, and it doesn't make them like sometimes I think about this stuff in terms of sometimes indigenous languages are made to be sort of like kind of mystical but I think it's just really kind of I prefer a pretty matter-of-fact approach. Just say, oh no, it's just like this. You know, for example, we have a term on yedi. Can anybody tell me what on yedi means in Tlingit for those who well, translate for those who don't speak Tlingit?
Aristocrats.
Yeah,
For
like
the noble people.
aristocrats, the noble people. Like we're people who have we have social spheres, right? There were the people who were kind of up towards the top, and some people were down towards the bottom. So the Anyadi were the ones who were up by the top, and Hawaii they call them Eli'i. And so you're kind of the royalty of the group. And so one of the things that I saw, someone said, can somebody tell me what Anyadi means? And someone said, yeah, it was the noble people, the leaders. It literally means a child of the land. And then the way that, so that's how somebody responded on social media. So the person who asked the question said, you have to be Anyadi to know what Anyadi is. And I was like, get out of town, right? And so, you know, so sometimes there's these sort of, it presents this mysticalness to it, which is, there's a different mode of thinking, but it's totally accessible and totally understandable. And it's sacred, but it's also just a language. Like sometimes I think we end up doing some things where we make the language, and this is a product of language loss. One of the things that we're going to talk about this semester is domains. And domains are a physical or social space where the language is used, right? And what happens is if you lose a language, you start to lose those domains. We don't use this when we're hunting anymore. We don't use this when we're eating dinner anymore. We don't, and so what's gets cut down to the ceremony. So then all you have is ceremony. That's the last place where the language lives. And then what happens is your language becomes too sacred and every act becomes a ceremony. So you can't just tell jokes and you can't tease each other and you can't just do day-to-day stuff because you feel like you're reducing the sort of the power of your language. But I think it's actually you need to restore that. And we call that the vernacular. The vernacular means what do you do on a day-to-day basis? What do you talk about? And then your goal should be substitute your indigenous language for those things and take it everywhere, right? If you're gonna have to learn how to wipe some butts in the language, you're gonna have to learn how to, you know, do all kinds of stuff in the language. And so this is a really sort of interesting thing for me. I think about this stuff all the time. So the thought world is different. So when you speak in the language, you have to think differently because you sometimes you're like, oh, I got to think, how am I related to this person? I got to think about the story that was told in this particular place. I got to think about time and space and these other things. So let me ask you this. When you speak a different language, are you a different person?
It's like stepping into their kind of like into their culture, right? Just almost like speaking through them, like when you speak Klingon. It's, I've always heard my grandma, everybody older than me has always told me when you speak Klingon, it's their ancestors speaking through you. So it really makes you part Klingon. And even in that, what is Ola? I can't remember the name, but I was watching the video and he said the same thing. Anybody who speaks our language, they're us. It's not limited to just us. It's everybody.
Yes, he was Welsh, right? He
Yeah,
says,
yeah,
if
the Welsh
you
guy.
speak Welsh, you're Welsh.
Yeah.
That was pretty mind-blowing. I know a couple other folks maybe had a thought on that question. And I'll ask you one other one.
I agree when you're speaking the language. Um, and I truly believe our ancestors are helping us on our journey. I used to think those were just kind words until I've had several experiences like learning Hadkill while I was sleeping. Um, but yeah, uh, when I speak the language, um, I feel different. Um, I think it's a connectivity, connecting to our ancestors, connecting to the language. Uh, we were at a ceremony in Washington, and it was naming and adoption ceremony. And my brother said a prayer in Hadkill, and uh, it wasn't just empty words. He poured his emotion into the prayer, and it was a beautiful, warm, sunny day, and I was just soaking it all in. It felt so good to um, hear a prayer said like that. So it was spiritual. I felt blessed. Anyways, how?
Oh, wow. So in terms of like asking you folks this question, so here's Moku Ola Honua. So Moku is the island, Ola is life, and Honua is like a world, right? And so about 15 months ago, maybe 14, I was invited to this conference. I went to the very first one that they had because I was studying there, and then I got invited to the second one and was very fortunate that some folks sent me over there. It was very nice. And so they debuted this film that I had you folks watch, and I hope you've watched the film. I hope you've done the readings. This is such important work. Uh, and so it was fun because Pilo Wilson he was one of my main teachers while I was going there, and then also Kawanoi, and then their kids. So their kids were probably the first outside of this island called Niihau, which was a pretty small island in terms of population. Uh, but outside of Niihau, those are the first kids to be raised in Hawaiian. Like so their first language Hawaiian speakers, the first ones in a long time. And so to watch their journey, it was really interesting. And I thought about that when that guy, when that gentleman said, and I met him also in Hawaii while I was over there. He came to the first conference, I think, because they had been making this film, perhaps. So he said, if you speak Welsh, you're Welsh. And I thought that's really interesting because when I think about this stuff, if I'm speaking English, then if someone says, "Oh yeah, that person's Tlingit," then I instantly start thinking about their lineage and this other stuff. But if I was speaking Tlingit and they said Tlingito, I'd be like, yeah, well, it's not a porcupine, so it's a human being. So with these types of thoughts, though, the colonial world does, and the Welsh are also have experienced um, being colonized, and they've experienced language loss, and they've experienced language oppression, right? So it's not just people of color that experience this stuff. And so as I sort of watched their film, and I was really enjoying this conference, and I was looking at some things and listening to things, I was just sort of thinking, like, so if someone speaks the language, are they that? Yeah, and I think, wow, that's a fun thing, and it gets complicated because I've heard people uh, who get upset, and they say, why are they saying our ancestors? Because it's our ancestors, not their ancestors. And I said, well, if they're speaking our language, then they're with us. But those are complicated questions, and I know that not everybody is going to think the same about them. And we're coming up to the time, so I got a bunch of thoughts in terms of this first set of readings. This gives you, and a lot of you probably already have a pretty strong foundation in this field of language revitalization. But we're going to sort of build upon these things as we go forward. And then just thinking back to that question, why should we revitalize our languages? I'm going to tell you folks like these two sort of things I've heard from Maori thought leaders. And one of them was kind of heard secondhand, but they sort of started their presentation at a conference by saying, well, imagine you go out to a forest wherever you live on a nice day to go out for a walk, and it's calm weather, and you're out in the woods, and you just sit down and you just listen to the sounds of the forest. And so maybe you can hear all these different birds singing, and you just hear all these different noises, and the birds especially really do a lot to set the atmosphere in our environments. And she says that just go out there sometime and just do that. Do a little bit of meditation out on the land, and just listen to all these different songs and noises that these birds are making. And now imagine if there was only one kind of bird that ever made a noise. Like, what kind of world would that be? And is that what you're trying to build? Because that's what's going on now, is you have thousands of languages, and it's trending towards having maybe 20, maybe 50. So you're looking at over 90% of the languages in the world that are going to potentially die unless things dramatically change. Then the other thing I heard a Maori scholar say at this Moku'ola conference was, and I'll adapt it to fit to Southeast, and particularly to a Tlingit mode of thinking. So this raven was going along, and something happened, and it met its unfortunate, untimely end. And it goes on to the happy hunting grounds, and the creator is there and says to the raven, "Caw, caw." And the raven says, "Caw, caw," and then goes about and is welcomed into the afterlife. There's an eagle going along, and something terrible happens, and it ends up in the afterlife as well. And the creator is there to greet it and says, and the eagle responds and goes about and lives in the afterlife. A Tlingit is walking along, and something bad happens, and they end up in the afterlife. And the creator says, "Chunk, yikehati guti, idneshi yak." And the Tlingit says, "Hey, how's it going?" Right? And so like that struck a chord with me. But when I heard them, they did that in Maori, and just saying, like, we need to get back to something that belongs to us and something that should be naturalized within us. There's things that are encoded in our languages that allow us to not only survive, but to thrive. And this is something that Walter Soboleff used to talk about, and other elders. Like this contains things that allow us to succeed. This contains things that allow us to continue. So as we go forward this semester, we're going to keep touching on these things, using a lot of examples, building upon vocabulary, and then figuring out how does all of this factor into our language planning, our materials development, and our methods of teaching and constructing our own institutions. Wednesday, we have our first curriculum presentations, and I just want to share, let's see, where is it? So here is the sign-in sheet. In case you're not signed up yet, you should be. So let me copy the link. I'll put it in the chat. So we got our first 5 already set. We're going to go 5 at a time. So here's what you're going to do. Is we are the faculty in the language school of our dreams, whatever that is. So you're going to show us something that you plan on teaching from. So you're basically going to you're going to give us the summary of your lesson plan. So you're going to show us what you're going to use, if there's any handouts or slideshows, and you're going to tell us what are you teaching, who is the audience, right? So this can be important. So the audience might be, I'm teaching 3rd graders who can totally speak our language. They already know our language. I'm just trying to like use it to teach them these concepts. Or I'm going to guest speak in my child's 3rd grade class, and I am going to teach them how to talk about this thing, and they don't know the language yet, so we're starting from scratch. So give us an idea of who the group is and what the situation is that you're using this stuff. But you're not going to teach it to us. So the goal isn't you're going to just teach this whole lesson, because you've only got 10 minutes. Okay, so we're going to use the timer method. So make sure that you've got a good idea of what you're going to show us. And then we'll take a few minutes and just give some thoughts. Not really on, we're not trying to fix it or improve it. We're just trying to give feedback as colleagues, as fellow faculty members in the language school that we have developed in our minds. And then, so this is the first, so you're each going to work individually, and then you're going to go forward. And then this gets us kind of through, almost through February. When we get into the next set, I'm going to give you a specific topic, and we can work in groups by that point if we want to. But I would like, when we get to that point, I want us to teach geography. We're going to do geography lessons in our language. Just inspired by an atlas of the mind, thinking about how do we think about these things? How do we position language learners in specific places in the universe? So everybody needs to go at least once on your own this first time. Again, you don't have to do the work all by yourself. Feel free to collaborate with whoever you want, but you're going to be presenting it to us. It's not a public demonstration. It's not a speech contest. You're just sharing some stuff with the idea of you're in a lab, and we're going to give you a chance to sort of do a little field test before you take it into the classroom. But again, don't feel like you need to teach us all of this stuff. You just need to show it to us. In this fictional scenario, we already know each other's languages, so you don't, we're going to pretend, and we'll see how it goes. But that's the plan for Wednesday. Any last minute questions or anything? We got to wrap up.
I was able to get all the reading and everything, but the film, I wasn't able to see the film. Is that in the course content or on the Blackboard stuff at all? Is there a link to that?
Yeah, it's on Blackboard, and then it also went out into an email, which reminds me, if you didn't get any emails from me about the class and the film and the projects we're doing, go into UA Online and check what your there's probably a way to change your default email, because it might be going to some email that you don't even check. So
okay.
But yeah, it's on Blackboard.
All right. Yeah. Okay.
If you don't find it, just let me know and I'll send you the link. Okay. Thanks, folks. We'll see you Wednesday. Looking forward to it.
Finish cheese.
Buenas cheese.
Direction.
Monaghan's Kingu.
Masik gonal cheese.
Cheese, Vasi, Doixon, Hawa, Hoyana.